The rise of electric vehicle adoption in Canada has the potential to tax the electricity production supply. An increase in the total number of electricity produced will have to increase substantially. How do we ensure we're producing power cleanly and efficiently?
Well, by working with Robert. No, but seriously, seriously, people have this tendency to think that if we get more and more electric vehicles on the road, it's going to be a super hard issue to deal with because all the electric vehicles will be plugged in at the same time. And I mean, already it's not that much of an issue. Let's start with the basic facts. Most people charge their vehicles at night when there's less demand for electricity. So what that means is that when there's peak demand, whether it's in the morning or at night, we can put together systems which are being put together right now, actually, to make sure that the vehicles start charging at 10 at night, for instance, so that during the night when there's less demand, it's not so much an issue. Plus, we have to think about vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, and bidirectional charging, which is going to be also part of the electric grid for smarter energy management, smarter electricity management, and that's not coming out. That's not going to be ready between now and the next 5 years, but that's further ahead. But that's going to be part of the plan. So we do have to make sure that our grid providers, our utilities, adapt to these new realities. But in fact, these discussions have started right now at EMC, as they have at Canada, I'm sure, because we're looking at this. And don't forget that I had this interesting conversation with someone from the Ontario government about a month and a half ago, and they were talking to me about the fact that, well, grid adaptation or grid improvement or updates would cost quite a bit of money. And I said to people from the Ontario government, I said, well, how much is it costing you right now to import oil? Because Ontario is not an oil producer, to import oil on a monthly basis for transportation. And I was stunned to realize that that person did not have that number. So I made the calculation and it comes up to $1.2 billion a month. So if we save that much money not importing oil for transportation just in the province of Ontario, there's a lot of money there that can be invested in cleaner grids, not to mention the fact that this money will stay in Ontario instead of, going away in other provinces or going outside to the US. Because right now, a lot of the oil that comes to Canada is not Canadian oil, it's US oil that we are buying from the United States. So yes, it's going to cost money. It's going to take some adaptation, but there's a lot of savings that can be made. And last but not least, let's talk about health for just a second. If you look at the Health Canada report from 2021, what they're talking about is they estimate that the economic cost of air pollution on Canadian citizens is $120 billion a year. And most of that pollution comes from transportation and oil and gas. So if we take that out of the equation, there's a lot of money to save. So billions of dollars that can be saved and thousands of lives that can be saved as well.
Daniel, I like your comparison with the oil and gas industry. I hear this argument all the time that we can't solve the problem with electric vehicles because there's not enough electricity, and to electrify all these vehicles. And it reminds me of during the 90s we were talking about how we had reached peak oil and how there wasn't going to be enough oil in the world to power all of our vehicles. And what happened in that industry, right? They found all kinds of money to invest in finding more oil, right? So I'm not worried that we're not going to be able to invest in additional electricity generation, right? Or making our grid more efficient and smarter, as you've said. So it always strikes me as an odd argument to make. Well, we shouldn't pursue electric vehicles because there won't be enough electricity. It's a bit silly. So I think there will be enough electricity. There can be enough electricity, and there's a lot of technologies that have to emerge. We're looking at some projects in small modular reactors, in the nuclear industry. that could be a potential way to bring cleaner energy, to areas that don't have hydroelectricity, for example. So I think there's a technology that will emerge if we decide we want to invest our resources in exploring those opportunities. So yeah, I'm not worried about running out of electricity.
Yeah, I mean, it remains important to move as quickly as we can to decarbonize the grid. The federal government has indicated that it wants to move forward with a clean electricity standard that would produce a net zero electricity grid by 2035. I think that's very important to move forward with. And Canada's in a very strong position to do that, not just because 80% of electricity is already non-emitting, but because we have numerous options actually to provide additional non-emitting electricity. Right? It's not, we believe wind and solar are going to play a pretty central role because of the lowest cost sources of electricity generation available today. But, small modular reactors are being considered. There's opportunities for new hydro development. There are a range of opportunities available. And really what we need to be doing is, when we look, it's a significant investment that we're talking about. But it is an investment. I wouldn't call it a cost. It's an investment. Yeah. A significant investment that we need to do. And it's in our interest to ensure that we're actually designing our market and regulatory frameworks to ensure that we're able to consider all the options, because we want to make the smartest choices. We want to find the lowest cost pathway going forward. And I expect the solution is going to involve a mix of different technologies, right, going forward. But again, there's that element of urgency. There's that element of needing to accelerate how we're looking at these questions to be able to go forward. Electricity is a sector, I mean, I guess not like the others we're talking about here, but electricity is a sector where you have long planning times. Yep. You build new generation facilities and you want them to run for 25 to 40 years, right? So every day you're taking a decision which is locking you down a pathway. And so it's important to get the signals in place now so that the decisions we're taking today are consistent with the pathway that we actually want to follow.
I would like to add something very important, because very often when we talk about electric vehicles being part of the solution, I think that we also have to consider, when we're talking about mobility, the fact that, I'll give you an example. Every morning on a weekday, people in Quebec drive cars. Okay, there's 25 million empty seats being driven around in Quebec right now on during rush hour, meaning that there's an average of 1.1 to 1.2 person per vehicle in their light duty vehicle. So yes, I agree that technology is key and very important, an important part of the solution, but just making sure that the governments, whether it's at the municipal, provincial, or federal level, understand that if we just go from a bunch of gas vehicles to a bunch of electric vehicles and everybody's by themselves in this big vehicle, it's not very efficient. So we have to come up with solutions and policies that will support carpooling and car sharing, because otherwise it's just a waste of a big vehicle being driven around most of the time half empty or 3/4 empty. That also has to be part of the equation, because it's not enough to talk about technology. We have to make sure that people have more responsible behaviors through good policies, whether it's for electricity consumption, because we are big consumers of electricity, big consumer of oil and gas, big consumer of gasoline. So that's something we have to look into as well.
All right, going on to the next question. This one will be for Robert. What do Canadian companies have to do to become more carbon neutral? Do you feel complete carbon neutrality is an achievable goal?
So to answer the last part of the question, yes. In the first part of the question, I mean, I think there are, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I think electricity is a big part of the story, but it's not the whole story. So everybody uses electricity, so you can be decarbonizing by ensuring you're using decarbonized electricity. There are many potential applications of energy use today where electrification does present a real alternative, right? And that will provide an opportunity for using that decarbonized electricity to do that. But again, it's not the whole story. We have had discussions already in this conversation around hydrogen. There are going to be discussions around different forms of biofuels. You know, there are a range of technologies that are at the fore. I often would argue that, you know, when we're looking at a country or a company moving towards carbon neutrality, that the biggest part of the challenge, there are technological issues out there, or technology issues still out there, but I would argue that the biggest challenge is fundamentally not technology issues. The biggest challenge is sort of market signals, regulatory frameworks that enable us to either be incented or to have access to these technologies that can help us to achieve these decarbonization objectives. So we do need research and development to continue with respect to technology, but we are massively underutilizing the technologies we already know are proven and well aware of.
I might add that a big like companies, that's a pretty broad spectrum, right? So if you're talking about manufacturers, it's different than if you're talking to a bank, right? But I will say that companies often get caught up in conversations, say around, okay, how do we measure our emissions, and what sustainability framework should we use, et cetera, et cetera. When the best companies are asking themselves through their strategic planning processes, what does the world want, right? And can we make it for them? Can we make money and be a profitable concern by being carbon neutral? And let's figure out that process. And I think that having honest internal conversations around what your company can be in the future, in a changed future, is really important. It's kind of, these are kind of first principles, but I'm shocked, and I've had lots and lots of conversations with directors on big company boards, for example, who don't have these conversations. But some of the really good ones, and you'd all know the companies do have these conversations. What's our company going to look like in 15 years? What are we actually going to be doing? What are we going to be making? What are we selling? Because it's not the stuff that we're selling now, because there's not going to be a market for that. So I think what companies can do is have honest internal conversations about what their companies should be doing to be profitable in the future.